Kronstadt is located on the Kotlin Islands, 30 kilometers west of St. Petersburg. Now it is a small suburban district of St. Petersburg with quiet alleys and a rich history. Kronstadt was and is a naval fortress. Traditionally, it has served as the base of the Russian Baltic Fleet and to guard the approaches to the city of St. Petersburg. Many times Kronstadt fortress played a key role in Russian history. The Kronstadt sailors joined the revolutionary movement in the beginning of the 20th century. They had been in the avant-garde of the revolutionary events of 1917. It was not surprisingly that Trotsky called the Kronstadt sailors the pride and glory of the Russian Revolution. Why did the pride and glory of the revolution, the Kronstadt sailors, decided to turn its guns on the communists? First of all, we have to understand that in 1917 in Russia two revolutions happened. In February 1917 the Romanovs dynasty was overthrown. Power passed into the hands of the provisional government, which was unable to unite the country. The provisional government had insisted on the continuation of the unpopular war with Germany. As a result, the Bolsheviks took power in October 1917. The main force of the communists was the sailors of the Baltic Fleet. However, all areas of the country didn't recognize the Bolshevik Revolution, and it was the reason of the Civil War. The Kronstadt garrison had previously been a center of major support of the Bolsheviks, and throughout the Civil War the navy of Kronstadt had been in the avant-garde of the main Bolshevik attacks. As a result of the Civil War, the economy started to collapse. The situation in villages became terrible because of the policy of grain requisition. The dictatorship and economic collapse became unbearable for the society. In 1920–1921 the peasant uprisings against the communists broke out one after another. In urban areas a wave of spontaneous strikes occurred, and in the late February 1921 a general strike broke out in Petrograd. And the Kronstadt rebellion was the most important and the most dangerous action against the communists, but it was a part of a nationwide spite of the communists' rule. What was the Kronstadt garrison in 1921? After the revolution, all naval bases in Finland were lost. The Baltic Fleet was concentrated in Kronstadt. There gathered together more than 200 military ships. But the Soviet power was busy struggling with the White Army. The fleet had been left to take their course. Thousands of sailors were called up to the Red Army. But the war had ended in the western part of Russia in November 1920, and the mariners who were alive went back to their ships. However, they were not the same mariners who arrested the provisional government in 1917. Great number of new recruits joined the fleet. They were a generation who saw the war communism and the Bolshevik terror. In fact, the majority of the sailors were born in agricultural areas of the country. They understood that the main reason of the hard situation was the military communism policy. Total nationalization and grain requisition were the main economic measures of the military communism. In addition, the Bolsheviks persecuted every another political party. On the 26th of February, in response to the strike events in Petrograd, the crews of the battleships Petropavlovsk and Sevastopol had an emergency meeting and agreed to send a delegation to the city to investigate and report back on the ongoing strike movements. On their turn 2 days later, the delegates informed their fellow sailors of the strikes and the government repression directed against them. On the 28th of February, the crews of the battleships Petropavlovsk and Sevastopol had a meeting which approved a resolution raising 15 demands. New elections to the Soviets, freedom of speech and press, the right of assembly and freedom for trade unions and peasant associations, the liberation of all political prisoners, No political party should have privileges for the propagation of its ideas. The abolition of party guards in factories and enterprises. All power to the Soviets and not to the party. A general meeting of the garrison on the Anchor Square of Kronstadt was held. There were more than 16,000 people, including the citizens and the sailors. Mikhail Kalinin and the Commissar of the Baltic Fleet Nikolai Kuzmin made speeches for the government. They called to stop riots, but they were hooted down. The general meeting passed a resolution including the 15 demands given above. The scribe Stepan Petruchenko from the battleship Petropavlovsk read out the resolution. He was supported unanimously. On the 2nd of March, during the Conference of Sailors, Soldiers and Workers, the Provisional Revolutionary Committee was organized. After hearing speeches by Kuzmin and Vassiliev, the president of the Kronstadt Executive Committee, they were arrested. Unfortunately, sailors spent too much time on negotiations and meetings. However, immediately there were organized a newspaper of the rebels, the Izvestia, or the News of the Provisional Revolutionary Committee. This newspaper became a source where we can learn about the life and the struggles of the mutineers and residents. During the revolt, Kronstadt started to reorganize itself from the bottom up. The trade union committees and all Soviets in the city were re-elected. More than 300 communists were arrested. The Bolsheviks announced that this was a revolt organized by the foreign enemies and the White Army. It was not true. Who were the leaders of the rebellion? They were sailors, not officers of former Imperial Navy, who, like General Kozlovsky, joined the rebellion later. Stepan Petruchenko was the main figure of the rebels. Petruchenko was born in 1892 and in 1913 he was called up for military service with the Russian Navy. During the February Revolution in Russia he had been with the fleet at the Estonian island Narva. In December 1917 there was proclaimed a Soviet Republic of soldiers and fortress builders. It was a republic under the red-black banner of anarcho-syndicalism. Petruchenko fought the Bolsheviks and the German Empire. In fact, Stepan Petruchenko was a professional revolutionary, and in 1921 he headed the movement. He had the experience of the administration. The main slogan of the rebels, "All power to the Soviets and not to parties," means that it was uprising not against the Soviets, which was a form of organization and can be translated as the council or the assembly, but against the political monopoly of the communists, who was the main power in the country. Anyway, the position of the Bolsheviks was clear. No negotiation or compromises, the rebels must surrender unconditionally. The emissaries who were sent to Petrograd by the rebels were arrested as the members of their families, who lived outside Kronstadt. On the 3rd of March 1921, the defense staff was formed in Kronstadt. It was led by former officers of Imperial Navy, but the main authority in the fortress belonged to the Provisional Revolutionary Committee. What was the Kronstadt fortress? It was the main navy base of the country. There were concentrated more than 200 military vessels, including 2 battleships. The fortress consisted of 20 navy forts on the island around Kronstadt, armed with hundreds modern cannons and machine guns. The garrison of Kronstadt fortress was around 25,000 sailors and soldiers who were ready to fight to the end. On the 4th of March, the Bolsheviks presented the ultimatum to Kronstadt. The rebels had to accept it or reject and fight. On the same day, the fortress delegate meeting decided to fight. It was the beginning of military struggle. The forces of the Seventh Army totaled more than 17,000 soldiers. The army was divided into two groups. The northern group was 3,500 and the southern group was about 10,000 fighters. At 6 p.m. on the 7th of March, shelling of Kronstadt began. At sunrise of the 8th of March, the storm started. The Red Army suffered heavy losses and the rebels were not injured. The storm of the fortress was unsuccessful. The same day, the 10th Congress of the Russian Communist Party was opened in Moscow. During the 10th Congress, Lenin said that the Kronstadt rebellion was more dangerous than Kolchak, Denikin and Wrangel together. Kronstadt survived the first attack. The next 2 days passed in a bloody struggle between the Red Army and the rebels, and both sides were preparing forces for the last fight. However, Kronstadt was isolated. Oil and food ended. The Gulf of Finland was covered with the ice, and support from abroad could not come to Kronstadt. If Kronstadt would fight a few more weeks, the communist regime would be overthrown in Petrograd and then everywhere in the country. That's why Lenin and Trotsky were hurried with suppress the rebellion. On the 12th of March, the rebel forces totaled 18,000 soldiers and sailors, 140 guns, and more than 100 machine guns with a lot of ammunition. The Bolshevik troops were supplemented by new forces. Military force had been increased to 24,000 troops, more than 150 guns, and more than 400 machine guns. The troops were divided into two groups. The northern group advanced from the north to Kronstadt from Sestroretsk and Lysy north. The southern group advanced from Oranienbaum. 300 delegates of the 10th Party Congress, more than 1,000 communists and 3 regiments of cadets joined the attack. The general offensive to Kronstadt started at night on the 17th of March. Under cover of darkness, soldiers stormed the fortress. Part of the northern forts were occupied without a fight. By some of the forts, especially on the southern side of the island Kotlin, put up the resistance. After noon, the air raids were made. There were battles in the streets. The rebels kept the defense in almost every building. The situation was very difficult, and Tukhachevsky had a plan to use even chemical weapons. This is the place where the Red Army soldiers rushed into the fortress. By 5 a.m. on the 18th of March, the resistance of Kronstadt was broken. From the western point of the island, people went to Finland. The distance to Finland was closer than to Petrograd. From 6,000 to 8,000 people crossed the Finnish border, including the leader of the rebellion, Petrychenko.